Alabama started summer practice just a couple of weeks ago. And this last week, they had a basketball camp. And so I'm going to call it open practice. It was not officially an open practice, but they had practice that they were practicing for the camp. And people that were aware of that it was going on were, I know of some people that showed up to these practices. There's some videos that are floating out around there. There's some obviously people that kind of took notes and, just kind of looked at the team and thought through like, hey, what does the team look like? Obviously this is early in the summer, right? This is June. So this is not what the team's going to look like, on the first game in November. And it's definitely not what the team's going to look like in March. Right? That's not what we're trying to say. But what we're trying to say is, early, do you have anything that kind of jumps out at you of, oh, this person, immediately looks more confident. This person looks better than I anticipated. This other guy is probably going to have to take a little longer to get into our system. What are the thoughts around that? And there's been a few big overarching things that I've heard from multiple people. Unfortunately, obviously, I have a full-time job. I was unable to attend any of these practices, but I do know some people that were able to attend these practices and got some different snippets and tidbits. And first things first, the team looks good, right? Most people that I heard that saw the team felt more confident after having seen the team than they maybe did walking into practice, which is a good thing, right? They, maybe had some concerns, whether it was about offense or defense, size, whatever it is with the team, and they definitely felt much better about it after leaving the practice. That's obviously a great thing. Another thing that you heard a lot is LeBaron Fallon feels more confident. For that one, I'm a little curious what they actually mean by that. Obviously, I think it had to do with this. I think it partially has to do with decisiveness, but I am curious when they say confidence because I thought LeBaron played with some of the most confidence on the team. Obviously, it's a little different when you're not the lead guard and you have a guy like Mark Sears that is the lead guard on the team. But I thought LeBaron Fallon for huge stretches of last season did play with a lot of confidence, and I think that's a huge part of his game. So him being more confident, I think, is even better. And that he is a guy that grinds in the gym, so I fully expect his shot to be better. And if you can get his confidence up from that standpoint as well, from a shooting perspective, that obviously being the part of his game that was the weakest coming into this season, that's a huge deal. The other name that you hear popping out was Jalil Bethea, right? We knew a lot about Bethea. We knew, hey, this guy's an elite shooter. Is he going to be able to take the jump? Right? He obviously was a top recruit, somebody that we were hoping, similar to Aiden Holloway, was just in a bad system, right? Our thought process is, hey, he wasn't in a system that was great for him. He obviously had his coach retire on him very early season. The circumstances surrounding Bethea were not ideal. And so in Alabama's system, with the type of shots that he's going to get, he's going to be much better. And from most people that I've heard, that has been the case, right? From what you can tell, he feels super confident. His shot looks incredibly good. He just feels very, very sure in himself, right? He looks like the guy that we expected him to be, right? Now, will he be able to take the jump that I think that he is capable of, like as big a jump as I think he's capable? We will see when it gets to the basketball court time. But from what I have heard, he definitely looks really, really good. Another guy that, and I'm leaving kind of the biggest surprise for the end, but another guy that we've heard great things about is a guy like Houston Mallette. If you followed this show last season or, followed me over on Twitter or talked to me about the basketball team last year, Mallette was a guy who I actually was super high on. Obviously knew that he wasn't going to play a massive role, but when we brought him off the bench and, ended up burning the red shirt, he did end up playing. I talked at length with some people about his shot looks so good, right? From a shooting form perspective, the shot is pure and it doesn't feel like a ton of wasted motion. It feels like a shot that is just going to be very, very good in college basketball. And there's a reason why he was a great catch and shoot guy from an analytics perspective. Obviously, that being a huge reason why Alabama recruited him out of Pepperdine. And sounds to be the case, right? Mallette shot, most people that I heard said that he kind of outperformed what they expected. His shooting was really, really good. And again, when you combine a guy like Mallette shooting and Bethea shooting and Holloway shooting, Phylon getting better shooting, Bowen and Sherelle and all these, Trelly, all these guys shooting, that really makes for, in what our opinion, is going to be one of the best shooting teams Alabama basketball has ever had, right? We talked at length a couple of episodes ago about how good the shooting backcourt is, and obviously Mallette's a huge piece of that, but the fact that he just feels so confident in the system, I know it was a medical red shirt, but for those of you aware, unaware, whatever, the medical reason was absolutely valid, but it isn't a situation where he was like fully hobbled for the whole season. It was a situation where they were having to give him like certain treatments and things to try to help him play through the knee issues he was having. But it was not a situation where he was in a wheelchair or he was on crutches or, he wasn't in some type of major distress with his knees. There just were issues related to his knees, right? So that obviously does help that he had an off season last season, or he had a season last season to be able to practice at times, right? I'm not saying he was able to go full bore all the time, but he definitely was able to have a good amount of practices to get more accustomed to what Alabama wants to do, because that was a big reason why he was going to redshirt in the first place, was that Alabama was just a very different style than Pepperdine was. Pepperdine ran a ton of sets versus Alabama was much more go with the flow. And with him already being, having the knee issues and being further down the depth chart, having missed the offseason from the actual knee injury, because that was where he missed a lot of time, was last offseason, not as much during the season. And so when you think about those kinds of things, that's where he was having some issues. And when you look at that, the fact that he's had the offseason now additionally on top of last season to get better and more accustomed to what the system is. And also, if you have listened to him speak or know anything about Houston, he's somebody that wants to go into coaching. He's a guy that understands the game very, very well. And that's as much of a reason why he came to Alabama as any. He's a guy that it would not shock me if he stopped playing and immediately went into a GA role right after this season. He's that kind of guy that really, loves the game and wants to, like I said, be able to coach the game. And so the fact that he has had that offseason to learn about our system, learn about our style, and then be able to attribute it to his game, I think that his shooting has been something that has surprised a lot of people. I don't think from a form and how good he is from a shooting perspective, it really surprises me. I think he may have a better impact on the game than some people may anticipate, but I think that he will be one of your better shooters on the team, right? He's a guy that you just cannot leave open because, even in the games that he played last season, he shot 50%, right? I believe it was just 5 of 10, but I mean, he shot 50% and he had been kind of just pulled post red shirt. And so it wasn't like, oh, he had been practicing with the ones this whole time and this and that. No, they pulled the red shirt. He came in, he went 5 of 10 from 3, right? And he impacted those games in a very positive way. And then by far the biggest surprise, and there's the freshmen, just as a heads up, Davion Hannah has looked pretty okay. His defense is really good. His offense leaves some to be desired, at least currently. Amari Allen and London Jemison, at least as of the original time, when I'd done some of the original research, they did not practice like some of the first day or two. So I don't have as much information on them. I've heard, relatively good things out of both of them, but like I said, I believe some of the earlier practices that some of the people attended, they were not practicing for. So there's some that we just don't know quite as much about. But the name that, had the biggest positive surprise that I've heard by multiple people is Katon Bristo, the guy from Tarleton State. And when Alabama got Bristo, he was a guy that was kind of a who's that guy. I'll be honest, right? Even as somebody who follows our basketball recruiting and follows our team very, very closely, he was a name that I did not hear until like the day before he committed. or a couple of days before he committed. Whereas in most cases, with the way that some of the people that definitely are more in the know, you will hear, Alabama obviously does a very good job of not letting names leak, right? Because they know that if they let a name leak, that they're interested. Somebody else, may either think that we did the analytics search on them or whatever. And so they will start bidding up the NIL, and it ends up costing us more money, quite frankly, to get a player. So, there's a concerted effort by Alabama to not have their name leak as it relates to recruiting a certain player until they are ready for it to be the case. So Bristo's name was one of those that just didn't leak, and he was a name that was not super high on anyone's transfer portal rankings or anything. I believe he averaged like 11.5 at Tarleton State, which he was the WAC player of the year, or freshman of the year, right? So he is a really, really good player. Don't get me wrong. But it wasn't like he was, averaging 20 a game, or, he didn't have the quote unquote accolades of a guy like Adrian Woolley or some of the other freshmen in the lower divisions that, you may have heard off the top of someone's head. So the question becomes, why did Alabama take him, right? That's the question that I feel like a lot of people asked. And even in the comments of my video about him, there were some questions like, hey, why did Alabama take this guy? Obviously Nate Oates knows what he's doing, but what was the reasoning behind this? And I think we have our answer. The thing that I have heard overarchingly about him is that his defense is phenomenal. And there have been a couple of videos that I have seen where he's defending a guy like Bethea, a guy like Aiden Holloway, and his 6'8" frame and how well he moves his feet is just really, really good. He has very natural instincts defending the basketball, and is a guy that is a natural defender and will be able, when you have that type of defense, to be able to play against some of our better players. And again, this is just practice, so, things may change. But how good he was able to defend in those moments, obviously when you look at how Nate Oates needs, that's going to get him on the floor. The other thing is he's a pretty good shooter, right? We will see how his shot ends up progressing, especially in our system. But, if you can get a Jaron Stevenson type shooter, right? Because the thought process was, when I asked some people earlier in the offseason, hey, what would be like a goal for Katon Bristo be? They were like, we don't think he's going to play a ton, but if he's like a fraction of as good as Jaron, was, right? People have a love-hate relationship with Jaron prior to him leaving because his defense was very, very good for large stretches, but then his offense was, when his shot was on, his offense was great. When his shot was off, he was borderline unplayable because he just didn't have the killer instincts to be able to attack the rim. That was the big thing, is when he was shooting great, he was awesome, but there was only like one or two flashes where he would really have that killer mentality to attack the rim. And when he had it, it was awesome, but when he didn't, you really just didn't know why it wasn't there. And what it feels like is Katon has much more of the, I'm going to call them natural instincts. From everything I've heard, it really just sounds like he doesn't get as much in his head. At least, again, it's only been a few practices. So could this change? 100%. So take what I'm saying partially with a grain of salt. But the big thing is, the people that I feel like saw him, and some of the videos that I have seen, we were taking this as a Bristo, maybe just a partial depth piece. That's what my original thought was, is, hey, he's a multi-year guy. He's a depth piece. You need some of those out of the portal that can be with you for multiple years. Now, do I still believe he's a multi-year guy? Yes. However, he also feels like a guy that has a much better upside than what we had originally realized, and also is a guy that is going to surprise a ton of people when you see the roster next season, and some of these fans that don't pay attention to the offseason and don't pay attention to the transfer portal. And you may have heard of Jalil Bethea, right? You may have heard of Taylor Bolbo and a couple of these big name transfers because they came from ACC schools. but you're not going to know the name Katon Bristo because he played at Tarleton State. And he's going to surprise some people because he is going to play more minutes than I think most people realize. He is going to make an impact, especially on the defensive end, that I think we originally were not fully anticipating. And especially if his offense, he learns how he needs to play in the offense in our system. Obviously, he averaged 11 points a game last season, so he has the ability to score. That obviously was against lower level competition. But, if he can score and, in my mind, any of the offensive upside that you can get is kind of a plus for him because having a 6'8" guy that can be a defender, if you can just get a couple of, threes or back cuts or whatever it may end up being you can get out of him to get some offensive output out of him, that's just, plus money, right? You're really, you're not expecting him to be the elite offensive guy, but if he can be the defender that you can switch, 1 through 4, and from what I'm seeing, like I said, I've seen videos of him guarding Bethea. I saw a video of him guarding, I believe it was Aiden Holloway, he moves his feet really, really well. He has solid length. I really think he's going to be able to guard 1 through 4. Maybe not some of the bigger 4s in the SEC. I'm curious to see on how sturdy his base is for like some, if somebody posts up or something. But again, that's not a huge thing that I'm concerned about, right? But from being able to move his feet and defend 1 through 4, I definitely think he's going to have that ability, and that's a huge deal when you're talking about a guy that, like I said, I think is very, very underrated for when we got him and how we got him. He was just a name that I guarantee you very few fans that did not follow this super duper closely even know that he's on the team. The only transfer that I will say we're just going to need to give a little time is Noah Williamson. I've heard from a couple of people that Williamson is going to take a little longer to get probably used to our system, used to our style. I know sometimes with bigs that is the case, right? We even saw that with a guy like Betty Iko. We saw that last season with Cliff. I feel like bigs in our system, because of what we're asking you to do, is just different, right? Even if you're a stretch 5 like Williamson, is and was, I still think what we're asking you to do is just different. So that is a situation where I do think that obviously Aiden Sherrill is your day one starter and probably will, at least for a huge part of the beginning of the beginning of the season, he's going to play many more of your minutes. And I think that if you go to more of a 2 big rotation, with them playing more closer to equal minutes, I think that will be later on, toward like end of December, starting of January for SEC play. But I don't think early November, beginning of January, when we have some of these really tough, or, like the MTE games, the end of November, I don't think those games are ones that I would expect Williamson to be playing equal minutes with Aiden Sherrill. I do think Aiden Sherrill is your number one option at the 5, and Williamson's more of a true backup option, not a 1A, 1B style scenario, right? Now, could that change? Could Williamson, get more into the groove, get used to the system, and, get better, so to speak? I don't want to say he's bad, right? But, could he play better in our system and be better for us? Sure. But I think as of this moment, if you were to ask me or anyone that, like I said, that has seen what he looks like or seen any of the videos currently, I would definitely put Aiden Sherrill as a clear number one option at the 5. And then Noah Williamson as a true backup at the 5, right? Being that he's going to take longer to get adjusted to our system and get used to what we're trying to do on the basketball court. So that's what I wanted to talk about today. Like I said, we will talk at more length later on as more, I hear more information about the basketball team. Obviously, there's a lot of football news that's going on right now, so I want to cover that as well. I don't want to leave that by the wayside, but we will continue to cover basketball kind of throughout the summer. I also plan, I mentioned it previously, I plan to have Jordan Harper on as well to have him discuss what he thinks about the roster, what he thinks about some of the things. I think he was able to actually see one of the practices in person as well. So I may try to see if I can have him on next week or so to discuss the basketball roster and what his thoughts are as it relates to recruiting, as it relates to, any practices he's seen, the rotation, and just what he thinks about the upcoming season. So if you're interested in having any of these guests, whether it be talking about football, basketball, or otherwise, please subscribe to the channel. Like I said, these are coming up here soon. Like I said, I do plan to have those coming out. I do plan to keep the 2 episodes a week. Like I said, really appreciate y'all kind of bearing with me having some personal things going on and other things in my life that have delayed the episodes at times. But as always, if you subscribe to the channel and turn those notifications on, I will be putting them out 2 episodes a week so that you guys can follow along with the content. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching. It really does help me out, and I will see you in the next episode. Peace.